Welcome everyone, and thank you all for attending our first virtual Graduate and Professional School Expo. My name is Mary Goldsmith and I'm the Career Counselor at Careerspace at Trent University. And we offer virtual appointments, workshops, online resources, experiential opportunities to connect and other opportunities to connect with employers, schools, and recruiters. And these services are free for all Trent students and alumni. And students can visit our website, trentu.ca/careerspace, to book an appointment or learn about our services. So we're very happy to have so many representatives from Trent Graduate Studies with us here today. And before we go ahead and get started, I do have some housekeeping items to mention. I would ask presenters who would like to have their contact information shared for students to put that in the chat box, so that that's accessible for participants. And we will have time for discussion at the end of the session, or that's how we've been doing it, if that makes sense for the panel. And for students and participants as they're thinking of questions, to just use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And after the session, it's being recorded, and we will be posting it to the Careerspace YouTube channel. So with further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests from Trent Graduate Studies, and ask that you introduce yourselves, and the floor is yours.
I guess I'll start. Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Collette. I work in the School of Graduate Studies as an administrative and recruitment assistant. I'll just say a really quick introduction to the other graduate. I guess everybody can just introduce themselves. It's just a really quick name and what department you're representing. So yeah, I'm Lori, and for any of the program directors that aren't represented here, I will do my best to try to answer questions that people might have from those programs.
Hi everybody, I'm Lisa. I'm also from the School of Graduate Studies, current manager, and yeah, hoping to kind of tag team with Lori and answer any questions that maybe we don't have representation for today.
Oh, maybe I'll just go ahead. James is here representing the Masters of Arts and PhD Cultural Studies program. Do you want to add anything, James?
Well, I have some things to say about the programs, but I imagine that comes a bit later. But yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to hearing any questions that the students might have.
And also with us is Neil Fournier from the Psychology Master's Program, and Jocelyn Williams from the Anthropology Masters of Arts Program. Oh, Dennis is also here. He doesn't quite have his video on yet, but Dennis Murray from the Bio-Environmental Monitoring Assessment Graduate Program. So that's who we are. I don't know what is next. Do you guys, we're all gonna do like a little blurb on your program. Who wants to go first?
I guess I can go first, if that's okay. So yes, I'm representing the graduate programs in cultural studies, and we have a master's degree as well as a PhD. In the master's program, we study how to critique and create culture, in addition to studying the theoretical and political foundations of the ways we think, believe, and feel. You can also create your own thesis or major research paper project to pursue avenues of inquiry that inspire and challenge you. So there are two different paths: the major research paper, which usually lasts for a year, and the thesis, which is a 2-year program where the second year is devoted to the writing of the thesis, which is a slightly more developed, more involved research project. You work with your fellow students and professors as part of a close-knit community. You will be asked to re-examine and reinvent the ways we engage and enjoy culture. In both the major research paper and the thesis options, you can write a traditional scholarly project, or you can pursue research creation. In this case, your project can include a major creative or artistic dimension. And the students that we get in the program come from a variety of backgrounds. So cultural studies is a discipline that isn't always necessarily represented at other institutions. It's interdisciplinary, so we get students with literary, film, and media studies backgrounds, Anthropology and sociology students often come to do graduate work with us. Political studies, women's and gender studies, philosophy and critical theory, as well as the fine and performing arts. So that's basically what we offer in terms of the master's program. The PhD fosters critical and comprehensive knowledge of the intellectual traditions in cultural studies. This ranges from everything from Marxism to feminist theory to psychoanalysis to media theory and all sorts of other traditions as well. You also develop your own special field in the program in dialogue with the faculty. This can prepare you for careers in academia, but also in departments of cultural studies, but also in other departments. Many of our graduates are eventually hired by departments other than cultural studies departments. Examples of special fields that current students are working in include memory studies, tourism studies, cinema studies, religious studies, science fiction, television, and internet studies. The program offers lots of opportunity to present your work in progress to faculty as well as to peers. There's also instruction advice dedicated towards helping students achieve place their first research papers in scholarly journals. And also the students do acquire significant experience teaching as teaching assistants as well. And all of these objectives are achieved through a combination of core seminars, independent research, teaching and research assistantships, and the completion of a dissertation, which is a bit different in terms of the way that we do it. Instead of sort of a single dissertation project, we sort of divide it up into 3 interrelated projects that students can sort of write as a more traditional dissertation or as 3 related projects that have some articulation with one another. So yeah, that's basically what I had to say about our programs.
Neil, do you want to go next and talk about psychology?
Sure, can you hear me? I'm assuming yes. So I'm the director of the psychology program at Trent, and we have a Master of Science program, and it's a sort of traditional thesis-based program, and there's an emphasis within our program within sort of 3 core areas of study within psychology. So students that are interested in the program typically align themselves to one of these 3 streams, and the streams are developmental and aging psychology, personality and health psychology, and then a third one is neuroscience and cognitive sciences. So students gain sort of a depth of knowledge in these kind of core areas throughout their graduate program training. And students will take a variety of sort of methodological based courses and statistical courses in their first year. And then that's supplemented by taking sort of more theoretical or sort of foundational based courses within the psychology discipline. So students will take their core courses in their first year and typically begin work on a research-based project that's under the sort of supervision of a faculty member within the Department of Psychology. And just to sort of illustrate the breadth of our department, we have researchers that do a variety of work in various areas within psychology. Some do more community or international based research. So for example, one of my colleagues, Maui Liu, looks at culture and socialization factors that may impact academic and social adjustment from children from other countries. Other individuals look at the sort of relationship between the environment and personality and nature connectedness and well-being. There are people that study sexual consent, attitudes and behavior among young adults. In fact, that's one of the prominent leaders in that area of research is actually from our department. We also have a number of faculty that do more lab-based research programs. So for example, in areas such as motor control and visual processing, some study memory and sort of the neurobiology of memory. In fact, I have a research lab myself, and we work primarily looking at brain plasticity, so how neurons in the brain remodel themselves in response to experience. And we look at various disease states like epilepsy and neuropsychiatric conditions. We also have people that study clinical-based areas of psychology. So, for example, there are people that study sort of child development and cognitive development processes, specifically within children, and how conditions like autism may affect that. So some of those students that work with those faculty gain some sort of clinical types of experience, although we're not a traditional clinical program. They gain sort of that clinical research experience. So our program, I guess, just to kind of, think about how it's laid out, it's to provide sort of the foundational knowledge for students to pursue eventually, if they wish, PhD level research in psychology and study, or as well as those that decide not to pursue PhD to look at non-academic paths, such as within industry and government related fields. So a lot of our students that have graduated from this program, and it's typically 2 years that most students will complete it, will go on to one of those kinds of 3 areas. So our program provides, I think, a lot of good foundational training that kind of helps to translate into potential opportunities later on for vocation and so on. Trying to think about some other things to add, but maybe if there's other questions, that's sort of a lay summary of the program, and I can certainly add a little bit more to it. But currently, right now, we're just a Master of Science program. We do not offer, as of yet, a PhD program, but that may be something that may change in the near distant future.
There was a question in our question and answer platform. It said, just wondering how closely students work with faculty. I think that was maybe a question for Neil because it came in just as you started talking, but possibly it was for James. So we'll get Neil to answer that question.
So I can certainly go first, and then maybe James and Dennis if they want to talk about their programs afterwards. But in our program, so students that enroll or apply to the graduate program in psychology, one of the major aspects that they have to do is they typically contact a potential faculty supervisor. So their research programs often will align very closely to the faculty's research interests in general. So you will have a faculty supervisor. That's a sort of condition of our program, is that a student has faculty supervision within our department. Now, that may vary, of course, depending on who the student may specifically work with. Some faculty have very specialized research programs, so the students kind of align and do projects that are related to that faculty's research program in general and what they're funded to do. Other faculty have a very open format, and a lot of times, sometimes the students will come in with ideas, and that will sort of percolate interest among the faculty, and they develop projects together. But all students are mentored, and in terms of how that takes place, faculty are expected to regularly meet with their students. Each year there's progress reports. And from that, sort of the mentoring from the supervision from faculty is to not only provide them with like resource support to be able to do research, but also sort of mentoring and training to be able to help them become sort of independent scholars as they transition beyond their master's degrees. So for example, giving them opportunity for professional development exercises like presenting at scientific conferences, publishing papers. We have a good track record of students in our program, over about 80% of them presenting at some point at scientific conferences, both nationally and internationally, based on research that they've collected, as well as publishing some of those papers as well. So those are sort of how that thing sort of unfolds in terms of faculty supervision.
And in cultural studies, it's very similar. Students work very closely with faculty in coursework. So there's both at the MA and PhD level, there's a first year course that sort of surveys the traditions that make up cultural studies. At the PhD level, it's team taught, so there can be as many as 8 or 9 faculty in a given year teaching that course. So students will have access to faculty that they're not necessarily working closely with at the committee level. But certainly all incoming students are matched with potential supervisors. Some students who don't necessarily have as clear an idea of their research project will be paired up with somebody just for the first year. Sometimes that person remains their main advisor. In other cases, there's a switch. There's also lots of mentoring that goes on with respect to teaching and research assistantships. So that's the other element I think that would be underlined. So teaching, I think, at the university level, at the beginning for graduate students can be quite an intimidating process. At least it was for me in my experience. So we tend to work quite closely with students, helping them to gain the confidence to teach in the classroom. Yeah, but otherwise I think it's quite similar to what Neil had to say about psychology.
Okay, Jocelyn, do you want to go ahead and talk about anthropology?
Sure, that would be great. So hi, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Williams. I'm the director of the Anthropology program. We have a Master of Arts 2-year program that culminates in our thesis project. We're one of the earliest graduate programs at the institution. We were founded in 1974. We currently have about 15 faculty members who participate in our program. The faculty members are drawn from a variety of sub-disciplines of anthropology. So we have quite a large complement of archaeologists who work in a variety of aspects of archaeology. So some examples would include public archaeology, zoo archaeology, landscape and environmental archaeology, as well as the archaeology of art. And then we also have faculty who work in biological anthropology, which focuses on human materials. So we would classify that as bioarchaeology. We work with archaeological human material, but we also work with faunal and floral, so plant and animal material. We also have cultural anthropologists who deal with ethnography, and then faculty who work with ancient Greek and ancient Roman studies. So we have quite a variety of disciplines encompassed within the faculty specialties in our department. And they do research in a variety of geographical areas, so North and South America, Mesoamerica, Asia, and Europe, for example. We have a 2-year program, as I already said. So our first year is generally focused on coursework. So that includes a method and theory course, as well as a research design course. And then your third course is something that you would take with your faculty supervisor. And you would generally develop that course to complement or expand upon your research project. And then the second year is when you work on the writing of your thesis, and then ultimately the oral defense of your thesis. So just to give you some sense of what might be unique about our program is that we certainly have a very strong focus on applied research. So most of our students conduct field work that first summer. So they join faculty on archaeological excavations, for example, in Asia or in Mesoamerica, or here in North America or South America. Some faculty have a lab-based research program, such as myself. So they'll have students that work in the lab with them doing experimental research, and that again begins generally in that first year and then extends through the summer and into the second year. We also have colloquiums where graduate students present their research to faculty and students. And we also encourage participation in events like the 3-minute thesis, for example. Our cohort size varies from year to year, but it's generally around 10 to 12 students, which means that we have a really good ratio of faculty to students. And we certainly create and foster kind of really cohesive cohort with each new group every year. It's certainly more challenging this year with things being online, but in general, there's a lot of activities and resources that help that first year cohort work together to kind of achieve those goals in that first year. We have a variety of research facilities in our department. So we have some faculty that have GIS lab facilities, for example, other faculty such as myself, where we have a research lab for stable isotope analysis and preparation, and then other faculty who have microscope and lithic analysis labs. So because we're such a large department relative to many others, we do have a lot of resources, a lot of material, a lot of lab facilities that really do allow for and kind of foster that hands-on research approach. But yeah, I think I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions as they come up, for sure.
Hi, just before Dennis goes ahead, I just wanted to mention we do see that there are a few questions coming into the Q&A and into the chat. So we'll just let Dennis do his quick intro on his BEMA program, and then we'll go through all the questions just in case that question might help somebody else on on the call as well. So yeah, we'll get through those in just a couple minutes. Over to you, Dennis.
Great, thank you, Lori. So I'm Dennis Murray, I'm the director of the BIMA program. Unlike most of the other programs, it's a relatively new program. We were only established a couple of years ago. The reason why the program came about in the first place is sort of a recognition that many of the students in biology or environmental ecology and whatnot were not necessarily being trained in the practical skills that employers tend to be looking for. And so as a result, Trent decided to put together this BIMA program, which really emphasizes applied training for students. And we've got three options, three streams. The first one is what's called a graduate diploma, which is a 1 year or actually 2 semester degree where students take a total of 6 courses. The second option is a 1 year course-based master's online. So students take 8 courses online during the first 2 semesters. Then in the summer, they do a placement, a 3.5 month placement where they're actually placed with an industrial sponsor or a government sponsor where they are able to gain real world experience and practical knowledge in a real world setting. And then the third option is a somewhat more traditional Masters of Science MSc option, where students do a typical thesis, but they also do a 3-month internship or placement. So it's kind of a hybrid in the sense that it's more in line with a traditional thesis, but also gives students exposure to real world settings through the placement. So the placement is really what unifies our program. It runs through the program by giving students real world experience in the environmental sector. So as I said, we've only been established for a couple of years now. The course-based student base is usually about 30 students, 25 to 30. In terms of interacting with professors, even though courses are offered online, there's still plenty of opportunity to interact with the instructors. We have real-time sessions where we were able to interact with the entire class. And so we do make an effort to try to break down the barrier that might arise typically in a course-based online program. In terms of the MSc program, just like the other programs, characteristically, a student will work specifically with a supervisor, a member of the BIMA program. The opportunity there is to interact directly with that faculty member. I would expect that all faculty members have direct access to all of their students. Like in my case, for example, I interact with my students at least 3 times a week, either as a group or one-on-one, and I suspect that most other members of the BIMA program do the same. So depending on which stream the student is enrolled in, there'll be different sorts of interactions with supervisors or instructors, but nevertheless, I mean, we do place a high priority on those interactions. Then the final thing that I would say is, as I said at the outset, the BIMA program was established to try to fill a gap in the training for students who might not necessarily aspire to going on to do a PhD and becoming a professor, but rather want somewhat more practical skills. And I would say that we've been very, very successful in placing our students in internships during the summer so that they gain those practical skills. And furthermore, I would say that once students graduate, their opportunities for employment are actually very, very good relative to a traditional master's program, in large part because they've received this practical real-world training during the course of their placement. So we're very, very proud of our placement program. It's been very successful in terms of training students, but also getting them ready for the employment positions that are waiting for the students upon graduation. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll go through some of the questions now. We're going to start with a question that was sent into the chat, and it's, Neil, you might have already seen this question, but I'll just read it out loud for the other attendees. My understanding is that to become a clinical psychologist, one needs a PhD. Is the Trent program oriented more towards producing academics as opposed to clinical psychologists?
Okay, so that's a great question. So we are a typical sort of academic-based program. So we don't offer unique specialization courses in clinical oriented fields. So for example, there's no clinical practicum opportunities for students because we don't have a clinical PhD program. The question is correct in stating that to become a licensed clinical psychologist, one does need to have a PhD in clinical psychology. But of course, the path to get into that could be, of course, through a master's degree that then gives you the training or the experience that then apply to those programs. So while we don't have specific clinically based coursework per se that gives that opportunity, some students gain some experience if they're interested in that by partnering with specific faculty that are clinically focused with their research. So for example, we actually have two licensed clinical psychologists within our program, one at the Durham campus, Dr. Ann Bolter, and one at the Peterborough campus, Dr. Laura Summerfield. And a lot of their students do get some opportunities to work within projects that have a clinical focus. So they do get some experience with some of the tools that are used for assessment and scoring. They don't work with patients or anything per se, but they get that sort of opportunity to do a research scholarly activity that might involve clinical populations. There has been some development with some sort of practicum-based courses that might have some interfacing with some of the more local mental health facilities near Oshawa, but those are sort of still in development right now, and they may start to unfold and have some opportunities going forward for the future for graduate students. To answer the question about do you get the necessary training to go into clinical, we've had a number of students that have graduated successfully within the master's program that have went on to clinical PhDs. So the major thing from the sort of advice I give to students that are interested in clinical psych programs, one of the major avenues that they look towards is whether you have research experience, because the whole perspective within clinical psychology is towards evidence-based practices. So if you have a strong foundation in sort of experimental design, and you understand sort of the rigors of scientific methodology, that actually gives you a step up applying into clinical programs later on after you complete the master's, versus say somebody who applies directly from say an undergraduate program. So certainly the master's program helps in that regard. But in short, there's not a clinical path per se. So there's none of the clinical coursework established within our program at this moment. I hope that answers your question. If there's a follow-up to it.
There is another question here related to psych. I'm not sure if this attendee, this participant is still on the call, but it might be relevant to other people that are here. So we'll just go ahead. What is the relative importance of admission test scores, undergraduate grades, recommendations, admission essays, experience, and other requirements? So I guess they're looking at the different parts in the supporting documents they provide and what's the most important. They're all important.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can speak specifically for our program. So the requirements for applying to the program, I believe a lot of that's actually specified on the Graduate Studies website and within our website as well. So the typical to summarize it, is the minimal average is, I believe, 77% in your last 2 years or so of undergraduate studies, and then at least an 80% within courses in psychology. So those are sort of like those thresholds that are used as sort of whether you meet sort of the bare minimum requirement to enter into the program. So another aspect that's needed, of course, is if students that have identified a potential supervisor, what they do is they create a plan of study that kind of references the work of that supervisor. So they have that conversation at the time that they're doing the application, and that's considered and weighted in our decision-making process. So students that don't have secured usually a supervisor, that's usually, even if they have good grades, sometimes that could be a bit of a detriment against them in the sense that they need to have supervision to be able to participate in the program. In terms of the grades themselves, I got to be honest, there's a lot of sort of individual consideration to each applicant. Do they have the foundations to be successful in our program? So i.e., do they have courses in the undergraduate programs that they've taken that gives them sort of the basic background to be successful in psychology? So have they taken psychology courses? One of the things that goes very favorably for applicants is whether they've created or have completed a undergraduate honors based research project, it's not the total requirement to get in, but it's usually something that's considered favorable. So if they've done that, that gives like additional sort of considerations for faculty. But you know, what I'm trying to say is that we evaluate each person's perspective sort of on a case-by-case basis, assuming that they have, you know, GPA requirements, but if they have an interest and they show sort of an alignment towards doing psychology research, then even if you have a little bit of a lower GPA, that will actually help to secure supervision in the program and acceptance into our program. Also, students, in addition to providing, say, the typical transcript, plan of studies, they usually provide a writing sample of something that they've done, like an essay in a class, or if they've done an honors thesis, something like that. If they've published papers, then things like that are also included as a part of a evaluation process. But it's not really, it's kind of like looked at sort of from the perspective of, does the student have a sort of an ability to sort of organize their thoughts in a constructive manner? It's not graded in any capacity. It's kind of like a all or none sort of consideration. Does that answer that question?
I think so. Do any of the other directors have anything to add regarding kind of the importance of the various documents that come in with the application?
Maybe just a quick comment. I think that was a very thorough answer, so I don't know how much there is more to add, but because cultural studies is sort of a interdisciplinary program sort of that straddles the humanities and social sciences, writing is key, right? So I think if we pay particular attention to anything, I would say it's probably the plan of study and the writing sample. Most of the degree requirements require writing in one way or the other. So, so not only writing skills, but also some evidence that the student will be likely to be able to complete these writing tasks through the program.
So what I would add to that is, given the fact that in the BIMA program, we have both course-based options as well as an MSc more traditional thesis-based option, I would say that the type of student that applies to the different options is quite different. And it would be important for the student applying, for example, to the master's MSc program to demonstrate interest and prior experience in research, as well as a link to an actual faculty member who's interested in taking that student into their lab. In contrast, students more interested in the one-year course-based masters don't need to identify a faculty member to work with. Certainly they do, it's certainly beneficial for them to demonstrate writing skills, but they don't necessarily need to demonstrate a high level of research prowess or prior experience, for example. So it's the paths that students can go to with the BIMA program are quite different, and typically the types of students who are attracted to those different paths are very different as well. And it's a matter of emphasizing the relevant skills to that specific stream that the student is targeting.
Okay, if there's nothing else to add, this question is closely related. I think we've kind of touched upon it already, but advice on how to find a supervisor during COVID times. I know I could just say from my experience a little bit, because I've worked in graduate programs a few years ago, like we've always recommended people to just do some research on the faculty members in that department, look at their website and see who best closely aligns with their research interests, and reach out to them and talk to them about who they are, where they want to go, what they want to do, that kind of thing, and see if, you know, they're able to take on new students and there is a mutual interest there in working together. But I'm sure as directors, you can add a little bit more to that.
Lori, that's a very good response. What I would add to that is that thinking back to when I was looking for a master's supervisor, I basically took a look at journals, recent publications, looking at papers that really grabbed my interest and finding out who are the authors of those papers and then contacting them directly. So it's really a matter of lining the student up with a faculty member who is undertaking research that's of real interest to that student. Remember that it's a 2-year commitment, a minimum of 2-year commitment for a master's, an MSc project. And so it's really important that the student find an area that's really of great interest to them, find a supervisor that they're going to be in simpatico with. So really that search it's very calculated, and it takes some time, and it's a matter of just really taking a close look at what's being published, what's out there, and who might be able to match match up with the student's specific interests. Because there's no point in doing an MSc project for 2 years if the student isn't really committed to investigating that subject matter to death, basically.
Okay, if there's nothing else to add on that topic, we will go to a couple of the questions in our question and answer. Can you tell me what type of housing options exist, and is Trail College still where all my classes would be? Lisa, did you want to try to answer
Sure, I'll
those
touch.
ones?
Oh, someone just came in my house and my dogs are barking. Sorry. Yeah, so there are typically some residence rooms reserved for graduate students available at the Trail campus. There's also a number of off-campus housing options available as well. I'll put in the chat a link to the housing website so that students can check that out for a little bit more information on residence and housing options. And then as for classes, it depends on your program and which program you're interested in. The classes, there are some at the Trail campus, there's some at the Simons main Peterborough campus, and then we have our management program at the Durham campus. So classes vary depending on your program. Excuse me.
And the second question, what type of scholarships are there for new grad students, and does it depend on the program?
So yes, there's different funding packages depending on which program you're going into, and there's also a number of different scholarship options. At the graduate level, most of the scholarships are competitive, so they require larger applications. We have more details on sort of all of the specific scholarships on our website. I'll post that link as well. I don't know if anybody has any more information specifically about scholarship applications they want to chime in, but my understanding is they are different depending on the scholarship, and there's sort of a number of different scholarships that we have available. So I'll post that link, but if anybody else wants to chime in, please feel free.
I might just add one additional comment. Is sometimes once you've identified somebody you're interested in working with, sometimes it's really important to have that conversation, because you can align some of your scholarship applications, especially if they have a plan of studies, to kind of match your proposed supervisor's program of research. So when that's being evaluated, it's always good for that to be at the forefront for that application. The other aspect would be sometimes it's helpful to talk to prospective supervisors or the person who you will work with, because they may know of more discipline specific areas of money or pockets of money that may not be listed on Graduate Studies website that might be an opportunity for you to be able to apply for, because sometimes Graduate Studies doesn't know all of the nuances of everybody's research programs. So they do their best to provide all of that information there, but sometimes I've seen from time to time some areas that some of my students are able to apply for that just isn't represented on the website, because it's very niche or research specific that they can that would give them the eligibility to apply for the award.
Okay, I think there's a few more things coming into the chat. I'm just going to reiterate some of the things we talked about. Jocelyn had added that the department websites are an excellent starting place for getting your supervisor, because it lays out the research that's being undertaken and links to their websites and social media and that kind of thing. So reach out via email to people who have interest areas that fit your interests. And okay, so we have a question. Is previous research experience outside of courses and or volunteer experience essential to get admitted to a psychology program? This question might apply to other grad programs as well.
So having research experience outside of taking your typical coursework, it's always a positive to have that experience. So if you've done, and most of the ways that we evaluate that is that most of our applicants have done an undergraduate thesis project at some institution. So if they've done that, that certainly would count as research experience. Other ways that we evaluate that would be, have they worked with potential faculty over the summer as an RA or a research assistant? Have they taken research practicums? Those things help, because our program is a very much a research-oriented graduate program. But again, there's enough wiggle room in which evaluations are more going to be specific to the individual and their interests that align with the supervisor. So those things are weighted really positively. I know for myself, when I look at students, I will take a student that has a background in my area of research, which is more neuroscience oriented, that will be favorable for me. But I have in the past taken students that have zero neuroscience background, and as long as they're passionate, excited about the work, kind of to highlight some of Dennis's points from earlier, that usually wins me over versus whether they have really in-depth lab experience. So it helps, but if you're passionate, you can usually make a pretty strong, compelling case in your interaction with your faculty advisor, and usually they're a pretty strong factor in after your application is reviewed institutionally and those applications are directed to psychology. That's usually what really determines whether you get accepted into the program or not, at least in our program.
Okay, I'm just going through the chat here. There's a few more kind of hints that the faculty online have provided to our participants. Oh, I just lost where I was. Yes, Jocelyn had added that the first contact email sets the right tone and demonstrates that you've done some research on them, etc. So that first contact that you make is important. Another question is interest the most important? Is interest the most important only criteria that professors look for in taking new students for supervising? I think that's been answered a little bit, but if anybody wants to add to that, feel free to jump in.
Maybe a comment would be the applicant should ask the question as to why they're applying to graduate programs is really the fundamental question. What is the path? Why are you deciding to do it? I think, in my experience as a supervisor of graduate students, I think you need to have that interest in the subject matter to want to pursue it. There's our professions where you can definitely go into without having a master's degree. So you need to do that homework, I think, to determine whether the path that you want to go towards even requires it to begin with. Because again, it is a 2-year commitment. And I think, having some sort of, interest in the questions that you're asking is important to kind of fuel that curiosity and to sustain that energy as you try to complete your project. It's also okay to not know what you want to do as well. And I think that's also an appropriate thing to kind of encourage for students, because a lot of students don't really know what it is that they're studying at the undergraduate level, and they have really no knowledge, so to speak, of what their professions that are related to their disciplines really entail. So some people think graduate school is going to be their logical next step. And I think that's important, but I think you need to have some clear motivation as to why you're pursuing that, because it is a financial commitment, but it is also a time-related commitment for you for the next 2 years. And you want to make sure that you're going into it sort of with your eyes open, as opposed to just doing it because that's just sort of on the table for you. That's sort of my philosophy with it.
And there were a few more notes added to that in the chat as well that I'll just read out loud for the participants. James had added that I think it depends on the program. In the humanities, methods, concepts, and theories are often as significant in matching students to faculty as areas, kind of in quote. And then Jocelyn added, certainly research interests should align, but no, I don't think this is the most important criteria. Faculty want to see that students have a record of success, either grades, but also that students are set up for success from like their past experiences and past successes such as scholarships. So yeah, if you have anything to add to those questions, I don't see any more questions in the chat at the moment, but if any of the directors have anything to add right now, feel free to chime in. Any more questions out there from our attendees that we have online right now for any of the directors, or just general questions? They don't even have to be about these programs. Lisa and I can answer any questions about the other programs, hopefully, or general things like housing and scholarship, those types of things that kind of apply to all. We're happy to try to answer your questions on anything to do with grad school at Trent.
I was going to ask on behalf of, I think, a lot of students who asked me the question, how important are the references in the application? And also maybe if you could give some tips in terms of how students can best approach faculty to ask for references in terms of timing and etc.
So can I chime in there? I think that's an excellent question, Mary. The letters are critical. That is, from my perspective, that's the faculty member's insight as to how well that student is likely to perform in the real world when they're undertaking the master's degree. And so I think it's really important for students, undergraduate students, to foster relationships with their professors, basically work with their professors in whatever capacity is possible, maybe work for them for a summer or volunteer in their lab or whatnot, so that that professor gets to know that student, to give enough information for the professor to really assemble a very powerful letter of support. And that's really, really important, I think, in terms of making the student competitive for a graduate position.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with what Dennis just said. The letters of reference are certainly important. I think just to give some advice to students is, one, when you're soliciting these letters, I would specifically ask if that person's able to give you a strong letter of support. It's useful to know right off the bat if they can write you something that's going to be supportive and going to be strong. Because I've certainly seen letters of reference that haven't been supportive, and I'm not sure that the student knew that that was the outcome when they asked. The second thing is, I would say, is give faculty as much notice as possible. So in your request, I would specifically give them the deadline, and if possible, give them your plan of study or your kind of supporting material, so that they can better evaluate your proposal or some of the comments or things that you said in your plan of study.
That's great. So students can help you write a more focused reference with that sort of background. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very clear when you evaluate a generic letter versus a personalized letter of reference. And the generic letter is usually the kiss of death for applications to any program, albeit graduate or professional programs in general. You want the referee that's writing your letter to provide detailed information that helps to understand your ability to succeed within that program. So again, sometimes students, the thing that I often encounter is I'll have a student that I may have had in a class in second year that approaches me in their fourth year and they want a letter of reference, and I have no idea who this person is. And that's not, to be rude, but it's just like, if I could write you a generic letter, but it's better suited for you to find somebody who knows you and can give this sort of personalized examples of why they think you're going to be successful to graduate school. Because every letter of reference, I think all the other directors will also say, is how every student that applies is the best and the top and passionate about science. So you kind of have to read between the lines, because they're usually very positive. Very infrequently do you see a really negative one, in my experience. But the ones that are just simple and short, that don't give any examples, are usually not very favorable for the applicant.
Thanks for your question, Mary. Now we have a couple more questions that are in the question and answer. I think this is kind of general over a few of the programs, so probably all the programs that we have represented here, but can you speak to teaching opportunities? So probably like GTA opportunities. I don't know, who would like to jump in there?
I can certainly talk a little bit about how it runs in anthropology. I suspect it's similar across the university, but we have graduate teaching assistants that our incoming grad students are offered. And then they provide a list of kind of their wish courses to the department chair, and then the chair assigns the graduate TAs to the courses that more closely align with their experiences as an undergraduate, for example. And the duties vary by course. So we have some graduate students who are assigned to courses where they actually teach the lab component of the course. So they're leading a lab, they're leading a seminar. So it's a very hands-on teaching opportunity. But there are other courses where it is more around marking and administration. So it does vary, I think, by course, and I suspect that's true across the university. But certainly students that are very keen to get that hands-on in-person teaching can put those sorts of course requests in to the department chair at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, it's the same for psychology as well. In fact, a major portion of their financial support or stipend actually comes from the graduate teaching award assistantship thing. So yeah, they also will do graduate GTAs will assist faculty in courses and do coursework. Many of them will teach seminars and will lead discussions with students. That tends to happen quite a bit in our program as well. So very similar to anthropology, as well as probably the other programs as well.
Another question for you, Neil. If I'm applying for psychology, can I submit references from other programs like business admin, or is a psychology one preferred?
So I'll have a question for actually graduate studies. So I believe if a person applies, if they apply, they could direct references to more than one program, could they not? So I thought that would be able to happen. You know, it depends on the type of reference you're getting, I suppose, because if your reference is one that is more that you're choosing, like you could be strategic with references. You could have one that could talk to you more of from a motivational or scholastic perspective that's more broadly, that would still be sort of viewed favorably, and then have one that's going to be more specific for your capabilities to be able to succeed in that program. So if you had somebody that you were applying to business and psychology, you could possibly have it transfer over, but it would be kind of unusual when somebody's reading the letter of reference if they're talking about, you know, aptitudes that would make you successful in a business program that doesn't speak to your capability to be successful in psychology. So, you know, that might be evaluated a bit negatively, but if you've had conversations with a faculty advisor before, they actually are the ones that have the opportunity to screen and decide whether or not a student is appropriate for our program. Us as graduate directors, we don't actually get to evaluate your letters of reference. It's actually your potential supervisor. So I don't have any say. I can look at it, but even if it's something negative, the final say is actually directed by the faculty supervisor in our program. So that if you've had a good relationship with that, it probably wouldn't matter. My suggestion for that person that asked the question would be if you could have one that's a little bit more specific to psychology, I think it would help you to have that. So try to get both if you can. But I can realize that people are busy and they may only want to write one letter, but it's a little bit of a tweaking job for them if it's the same referee.
I think that we might have come to the end of those questions, but I think we're at the end of our time for today. So I'll have to take on my role of clock watcher now. I really want to thank everyone for attending here. Lori and Lisa, thank you for facilitating, and that was really helpful, and so happy to have had faculty from so many different areas of grad studies. I think that was fantastic, from humanities and social science and sciences. So thank you for that, and students will have the recording, so more students will be able to access it. So really appreciate your time today.
And thank you for organizing the panel. It's been a pleasure.
I'll thank my colleagues for you. Okay. Thanks
Mary.
very much.
Okay.
Good day.
Thank you guys. And if you have any
Bye.
questions about psychology, feel free to email me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.